For as long as anyone could remember, there was one girl nobody could beat in class. She came first in primary 1. She came first in primary 2, primary 3, primary 4, primary 5, primary 6. She entered secondary school, and nothing changed. JSS 1 first, JSS 2 first, JSS 3 first, SS 1 still first. Teachers trusted her. Parents used her as an example. Students believed that first position belonged to her. Some records looked impossible to break, until one quiet boy walked into her class. "My name is Patience. Welcome to a Tanologue." There are some classrooms you forget the moment you leave them. Then there are classrooms you remember for the rest of your life. This was one of them. It had 56 students, 56 different personalities, 56 different dreams. And every single morning, the classroom came alive long before the first teacher arrived. The football boys were always the loudest. If that referee had eyes, that match would have ended differently. "You don't know football. I know more than you. You, please." Before long, the argument would spread from one desk to another. Some students joined. Others laughed. Nobody knew how a football discussion always found its way into the classroom before lessons. Not far from them sat another group, the students who loved books. Some of them had already opened their notebooks before the first bell. Some were comparing answers. Some were discussing questions from the last assignment. If anyone needed help with schoolwork, they usually started by looking for someone from that group. At the back of the class sat another set of students. They were not bad children. They simply loved everything except reading. One person was still copying yesterday's notes. Another was begging for homework. Another was busy saying, "A beg, help me. If the teacher asks me anything today, I'm finished." Their laughter never stopped. Their unofficial leader was a boy called Treasure. Everybody knew him. Not because he caused trouble, not because he fought people, but because no matter how examinations came and went, Treasure somehow managed to remain at the bottom of the class rankings. Even he laughed about it. "If I leave last position, who will collect it?" he would joke. The whole class would burst into laughter. Then there was Good Luck. If someone new entered the classroom for the first time, Good Luck would probably be the first student they noticed. Not because he was noisy, not because he was brilliant. Good Luck was simply Good Luck. He said strange things. He behaved differently. Sometimes he asked questions that made everybody stare at him before laughing. Sometimes he laughed at things nobody else found funny. Sometimes he started conversations that only made sense to him. To the class, he was the strange one. But somehow, everybody had spoken with Good Luck before. The football boys talked with him. Treasure's group talked with him. Even some students from the study group chatted with him once in a while. People laughed at him. People shook their heads because of the things he said. But he was still part of the class. That was simply who Good Luck was. And then there was Daniela. If this classroom were a small country, Daniela would have been its president. She was the class prefect. She was always calm, always respectful, always ready to help. Whenever somebody struggled with a question, one sentence could be heard almost every day. "Go and meet Daniela." And they did. She explained things patiently, not because she wanted people to praise her. She simply enjoyed helping. That was one reason teachers trusted her so much. The other reason was because she was always first in class. Nobody questioned it anymore. It had become normal. Even when examination results were about to be released, students already knew one thing. First position belonged to Daniela. The only mystery was who would come second. One of the students who often fought for that position was her best friend, Ella. Her full name was Emanuela. Very few people called her that. To everybody else, she was simply Ella. Unlike Daniela, Ella wore her confidence where everybody could see it. She believed she was one of the smartest students in the class. Most times, she finished second, sometimes third, sometimes fourth, sometimes fifth, but she never dropped below fifth. Even then, she was never satisfied. Whenever results came out and she saw fourth position, she frowned. "If I had just done better in mathematics," or "that biology exam spoiled everything." At home, things were even harder. Her parents never looked at fourth position. They looked at first. Daniela came first again. "You girls are in the same class. Learn from her." Those words annoyed Ella every single time. Not because she hated Daniela, but because she was tired of hearing her name. Still, the two girls remained best friends. Life in that classroom had followed the same pattern for years. Everyone knew their place. Everyone knew what to expect. Nobody imagined anything would change. Then one morning, the class teacher walked into the classroom with a new student. The room became quiet. "As you can see," the teacher said, "we have a new student joining us this term." Every pair of eyes turned toward the boy standing beside the teacher. He looked nervous, very nervous. "Introduce yourself." The boy swallowed. "My name is Desmond." "Good," the teacher said with a smile. "Class, make him feel welcome." "Good morning," a few students replied. Some nodded. Some smiled politely. The teacher looked around. "Who has an empty seat?" Silence. Nobody answered. One student looked away. Another suddenly became busy arranging books. Someone quietly pulled a bag onto the empty chair beside them. The teacher looked around again. Nobody! Then a voice came from the middle of the class. "He can sit with me." Every head turned. It was Good Luck. "I don't have a seat, mate." The teacher smiled. "Thank you, Good Luck." Desmond picked up his bag and slowly walked across the classroom. As he sat down, Good Luck smiled. "My name is Good Luck." Desmond smiled back. "I'm Desmond." It was a small conversation. A very small one. But neither of them knew. It was the beginning of a friendship that would change both of their lives. The first few weeks were not easy for Desmond. Everything in the school was different. The teachers taught differently. The students behaved differently. Even the way lessons moved was different from his former school. Sometimes, before one lesson ended, another teacher was already waiting outside the classroom. "You have to be fast in this school," Good Luck whispered one day. Desmond smiled. "I can already see that." Every day, he discovered something new. One teacher wanted complete silence before entering the class. Another teacher expected everybody to stand perfectly before greeting. One teacher loved asking surprise questions. Another enjoyed calling students to solve questions on the board. Little by little, Desmond began to understand how things worked. But there was one thing he still could not understand: making friends. Whenever students formed groups after class, he quietly stood by himself. When students laughed together, he watched from a distance. Whenever he greeted someone, most of them greeted him back politely, then continued talking with their own friends. It was not that they hated him. They simply already had their own circles. Only Good Luck never made him feel like an outsider. Every morning, Desmond, Good Luck always shouted his name before he even reached the classroom. Sometimes Desmond wondered how Good Luck always managed to see him first. One afternoon during break, Desmond looked across the classroom. Ella was talking with Daniela. She laughed. Desmond looked away, then looked again. Good Luck noticed. "What?" Desmond smiled shyly. "Nothing." Good Luck narrowed his eyes. "It is not nothing." Desmond laughed softly. "I just wanted to ask." Good Luck waited. "Who is that girl?" Good Luck turned to look. "Ella." "Yes." Desmond nodded. "I think she's beautiful." Good Luck immediately raised his hand. "Please." Desmond blinked. "What?" "Do not bring all those girl matters to me." Desmond laughed. "I only asked who she is. I do not know anything." "You know her." "I know everybody." "So tell me." Good Luck shook his head dramatically. "No. I came to school to pass my exams." The two boys laughed. "You are not serious," Desmond said. "I am very serious." Good Luck picked up his food. "If you want to know about girls, ask somebody else." Desmond could not stop laughing. That was one thing he liked about Good Luck. You never knew what he would say next. As the weeks passed, Desmond slowly realized he had another problem. His notebooks. Because he joined the school after lessons had already started, many notes were missing. Very many. One afternoon, he looked at his mathematics notebook. Only a few pages had writing. The rest were empty. He sighed. "This will take forever." Good Luck looked over. "You have not even started physics." Desmond closed the notebook. "Please do not remind me. You still have chemistry." "I know." "Biology too." "I know." "Geography." "I know." Good Luck burst into laughter. Desmond laughed too. After school that day, he gathered enough courage to meet Daniela. Everybody already knew. If you needed help with schoolwork, you met Daniela. "Daniela!" She turned. "Yes." "I wanted to ask." "My notes." She smiled. "I would have helped you." Desmond's face brightened. But somebody borrowed them this morning. His smile slowly disappeared. Oh, I have not gotten them back yet. It is okay. I will give them to you when they return them. Thank you. You are welcome. Desmond walked away. Good Luck was waiting outside. So, somebody borrowed her notes. Good Luck nodded as if he had expected it. I told you. Told me what? You have joined a very busy class. The next day, Desmond asked another student. My notes are with somebody. Another one. I have not finished copying mine. Another one. I will bring them tomorrow. Tomorrow became another tomorrow. Then another. Even Good Luck was still struggling. One afternoon, Desmond looked at Good Luck's notebook. You resumed on the first day. Yes. You are still copying notes. Good Luck looked at him with a straight face. I have accepted my destiny. Desmond laughed, so hard that students around them turned to look. One day, during physics, the teacher finished explaining a topic. Then he wrote 6 questions on the board. You will answer all of them. The whole class immediately became busy. Pens moved quickly across notebooks. Desmond stared at the first question. He understood part of it. The second one confused him. By the 4th question, he was completely lost. He looked around. Everybody else was writing. Even Treasure was writing something. Desmond sighed. When the bell for break rang, the whole class stood up happily. Finally, food. Before anybody could leave, the physics teacher walked back into the classroom. Everybody froze. I said submit your classwork. One by one, students walked forward. The teacher collected each notebook. Then he looked around. Anybody that has not submitted. Nobody spoke. The teacher's eyes landed on Desmond. You. Desmond stood up. I have not finished, sir. The teacher nodded. Then you are not going anywhere. The whole class knew exactly what that meant. The teacher continued. In my subject, if you have not finished your work, you have not earned your break. A few students quietly returned to their seats. Apparently, Desmond was not the only one. Outside the classroom, students were already buying food. Inside, Desmond could hear laughter from outside while he struggled with question 2. His stomach growled. Good Luck quietly looked back through the window. He raised the meat pie in his hand. Then he smiled. Desmond pointed at the door. You are not helping. Good Luck laughed so hard that he almost dropped his food. The physics teacher looked up. Good Luck. Yes, sir. Do you want to join him? Good Luck immediately became serious. No, sir. Then continue your break. Yes, sir. Desmond could not help smiling. This school was unlike any school he had ever attended. The first few weeks slowly became months. Without realizing it, Desmond had started getting used to the school. He no longer got lost while looking for classrooms. He knew which teachers loved asking questions. He knew which teachers smiled a lot. And he definitely knew never to leave physics class without finishing every single question. That lesson had taught him enough. One morning before lessons began, the classroom was as lively as always. The football boys had already started arguing. I am telling you, he did not score that goal on purpose. You were not even watching the match. I watched the highlights. The highlights? Sit down. The whole class laughed. A few seats away, Treasure was turning from one desk to another. Who has yesterday's notes? Nobody answered. He moved to another person. Please, I only need it for 5 minutes. You said 5 minutes yesterday. I mean 5 real minutes today. More laughter. Even Daniela laughed. You have been looking for those notes since yesterday. Treasure pointed at her dramatically. Class prefect, please have mercy. You should have copied them yesterday. I was busy. Doing what? Treasure paused. The class waited. I forgot. The room burst into laughter again. Daniela laughed so hard she had to cover her face. You forgot what made you busy. I forgot everything. Even the football boys clapped. Desmond sat quietly, smiling. He liked watching the class. Every day felt alive. Then Good Luck suddenly leaned closer. You are smiling. So, you have finally accepted that this class is mad. Desmond laughed. I think I have. I knew it. Good Luck nodded proudly. You are becoming one of us. As time passed, Desmond began noticing something. Whenever students had a difficult question, they looked for Daniela. Daniela, can you explain this? Daniela, I do not understand this. Daniela, please help me. Sometimes even teachers said, "If you still do not understand, meet Daniela after class." She never complained. She explained, then laughed with the same students a few minutes later. She was not serious all the time. She joked. She laughed. She even teased classmates once in a while. She was simply someone everybody enjoyed being around. Desmond watched all of this quietly. One afternoon, he looked across the classroom. Ella was laughing with Daniela. A few boys were also talking with them. Without thinking, Desmond stood up. "I will be back." Good Luck looked up from his notebook. "Where are you going?" "Just there." Good Luck followed his eyes. "Ella!" Desmond froze. "Maybe." Good Luck sighed dramatically. "Oh no!" "What?" "You are starting again." Desmond smiled. "I only want to greet her. That is how it always starts. You greet. You smile. Then before you know it, you have failed mathematics." Desmond laughed. "I am serious. I am also serious." Good Luck pointed at him. "Leave girls alone." Desmond ignored him and walked away. "Good afternoon." Ella looked up. "Oh, good afternoon." She smiled politely, then continued her conversation. Desmond stood there for a second. Nobody invited him into the discussion. After a few awkward moments, he quietly walked away. Good Luck was already waiting. So what? Did she ask you to marry her?" Desmond burst into laughter. "You are impossible." "I know. What if I just wanted to greet her?" Good Luck shrugged. "You greeted her. Now leave her alone." Desmond shook his head. "You really do not like talking about girls." "I like passing my exams." Days passed. Nothing changed. People still hardly noticed Desmond. Apart from greetings, very few students spoke with him. Sometimes he wondered if changing schools had changed anything at all. One afternoon, he watched as the class teacher entered with examination results from another class. Immediately, everybody became interested. "They have released their results. I wonder who came first. I heard the same girl still carried first." The conversation continued. That was when something struck Desmond. People always talked about first position. Teachers remembered first position. Parents celebrated first position. Students respected first position. He slowly turned toward Daniela. She was laughing at something Treasure had just said. Yet without saying a word, everybody already knew she would come first again. Desmond looked down at his notebook. Then a thought quietly entered his mind. "What if?" He whispered to himself. "What if I become first?" The thought refused to leave. That evening, while walking home, he thought about it again. If he became first, maybe teachers would finally know him. Maybe students would stop seeing him as the new boy. Maybe Ella would finally notice him. Maybe his parents would become even prouder. The more he thought about it, the more impossible it sounded. Beat Daniela, the girl nobody had beaten since primary school? He laughed at himself, then stopped laughing. What if I actually try? The next morning, he told Good Luck, "I want to become first." Good Luck stared at him for 3 whole seconds. Then he laughed, so loudly that the football boys turned around. "You?" Desmond nodded. "Yes." Good Luck laughed even harder. "You have not even finished copying all your notes." "I will." "You came late." "I know." "You were talking about beating Daniela?" "I am." Good Luck held his stomach. "My friend, please let me laugh first." Desmond laughed too. "I am serious." "I know. That is why I am laughing." "You are wicked." "No. I am realistic." Good Luck pointed toward Daniela. "That girl has been carrying first since forever. You want to wake up one morning and collect it." Desmond smiled. "I never said it would be easy." Good Luck shook his head. "When you finally carry first, I will carry the school on my head." The two of them laughed. But after the laughter, Desmond's smile slowly disappeared. He looked at Daniela again. Then he quietly whispered to himself, "I will try." From that day, everything changed. After school, he studied. Before sleeping, he studied again. When he woke up early, he revised what he had read the previous night. Sometimes he slept on top of his books. His mother would gently wake him. "Desmond." He slowly opened his eyes. "You slept again." "I was reading." "I know." She smiled. "I am proud of you." His father also noticed. One evening he walked into Desmond's room. "You are working very hard." "I have to." His father nodded. "Hard work always pays, but never stop improving." Desmond remembered those words every single day. He kept pushing himself. Even Good Luck noticed. One afternoon, he entered the classroom and found Desmond reading. "You are reading again?" "Yes." "You read yesterday." "I know." "You read this morning." "I know." "You even read during break." "I know." Good Luck looked at him. "You want to carry first?" "Yes." Good Luck sighed. "I hope first position knows you are looking for it." Desmond laughed. "I hope so too." Finally, first term examinations arrived. The entire class did their best. Then came result day. Students crowded around the notice board. Some shouted happily. Some looked disappointed. Desmond searched for his name. Then he found it. 16th position. He stared at it. He had improved. A lot. But he slowly looked upward. First position. Daniela. Again. Nobody looked surprised. It was what everybody had expected. Inside the classroom, Treasure raised both hands. "I escaped last position." The class laughed. "What position did you carry?" Treasure scratched his head. "I do not think that part is important." Even Daniela laughed. Ella smiled after seeing she was still among the top students. Life in the classroom continued as usual. Only one person was quietly staring at his result. Desmond, 16th. It was a huge improvement, but it was nowhere near where he wanted to be. The holiday began. To many students, it was time to rest, to play, to travel, to forget about school for a few weeks. But not Desmond. Every morning, he woke up with only one thing on his mind. First position. He was no longer reading just because he wanted to improve. He was reading because he wanted to become the best. His room slowly became his second classroom. Books stayed open almost every day. Whenever he did not understand something, he searched for another way to understand it. Whenever he found a difficult question, he refused to move on until he solved it. He even began writing down the mistakes he made during first term. "I will never make this mistake again," he would tell himself. His mother noticed the change. One afternoon, she walked into his room carrying some food. "You have been reading since morning." Desmond smiled. "I know. Rest a little." "I will." She placed the food beside him. "I am proud of you." After she left, Desmond looked at the books again. He had promised himself something. He was not returning to school as the same student. Second term finally resumed. The teachers immediately started teaching. Unlike first term, Desmond was no longer trying to catch up. This time, he started with everybody else. Every lesson mattered. Every correction mattered. Every assignment mattered. If a teacher corrected one small mistake, Desmond wrote it down. If a teacher saw the difficult question, he practiced it again after school. Sometimes, he even solved the same question 3 different ways just to make sure he understood it completely. His classmates slowly began noticing. "You are reading again," one boy asked. Desmond smiled. "I just want to understand it properly." The boy shook his head. "You have read enough." Desmond only smiled. To him, there was no such thing as reading enough. Then came the class test. The school only conducted one test before examinations. Students were nervous. Even Ella revised more than usual. Treasure kept praying that the questions would be easy. Good Luck looked relaxed as always. "I have already accepted whatever wants to happen." Desmond laughed. "You are unbelievable." "I know." The tests came, one after another. When the scripts were finally shared, students immediately started comparing scores. "I got 16. I got 13. I lost 2 marks because of one silly mistake." Then Good Luck looked at Desmond's paper. His eyes became wide. 20. Desmond nodded. Good Luck collected another paper. 20 again. Desmond smiled. Good Luck quickly picked another one. "Do not tell me." He turned the paper over. Another 20/20ths. Good Luck looked at Desmond, then looked at the papers again, then back at Desmond. "So?" Desmond smiled. "So? You are actually serious." "I told you." Good Luck folded his arms. This still does not mean you will beat Daniela." Desmond leaned back in his chair. "We shall see." Good Luck pointed at him. "Do not become proud." "I am not. I have been in this class longer than you." "I know. People have tried." "I know. Even Ella has tried." "I know. They all failed." Desmond smiled. "We shall see." Good Luck shook his head. "My friend, if you like read heaven and earth together, Daniela is still carrying first. Desmond laughed. We shall see. As the weeks passed, one thing became obvious. Desmond was no longer just another student. Teachers started noticing him. Whenever a difficult question was asked, his hand slowly became one of the first to go up. Sometimes he answered correctly. Sometimes he made small mistakes. But whenever he made one, he learned from it immediately. His confidence quietly grew, not because people praised him, but because he could feel himself improving. Then the second term examinations arrived. This time, Desmond walked into every examination hall with a calm mind. He had prepared. He had done everything he possibly could. Now the results would speak for themselves. The examinations ended. The holiday began once again. A few days later, the school released the results. As usual, each class had its own notice board. Students who came early could check their positions there. Desmond stood quietly before the board. His heartbeat became faster. He started from the bottom, working his way up through 56, 55, 50, 40, 30, 20. His name was nowhere. He smiled. Then he looked higher. 10. Still nothing. 5. Nothing. 3. Nothing. His heartbeat became even louder. He looked at number 2. Not his name. Slowly, his eyes moved to the very top. 1. Desmond. He froze. For a few seconds, he simply stared at it. Then a slow smile appeared on his face. He had done it. He had actually done it. The impossible had happened. Without saying a word, he quietly looked at the board one more time, then turned around and walked home with the biggest smile he had ever worn. He could not wait to tell his parents. The holiday was still going on. Not every student came to school immediately to check their results. Some preferred waiting until resumption. Some wanted their parents to collect the printed result. Some simply believed there was no need. Daniela was one of those students. 4 years, she had never bothered checking the class notice board. Why would she? She already knew what she would see. First position. That had been her life for years. One morning, Good Luck entered the school compound. He had only come to check his result. As usual, the notice board for SS2 was already crowded with a few students. Good Luck slowly walked toward it. He was not even looking for his own name first. His eyes naturally went to the very top. First position. Then he stopped walking. He blinked. No. He stepped closer. He looked again. 1. Desmond. Good Luck frowned. He rubbed his eyes, then looked again. Still 1. Desmond. He stretched out his hand. Using his palm, he wiped the place where Desmond's name was written. Nothing changed. He looked around the paper, then back at the name. No, he whispered. They wrote the wrong name. He looked again. Maybe they meant to write Daniela. Maybe somebody made a mistake while typing. He checked one more time. Still Desmond. Good Luck quietly stepped back. For the first time since knowing Desmond, he had nothing to say. Just then, Desmond walked into the compound. The moment he saw Good Luck, he smiled. You came early. Good Luck slowly turned around. I saw the result. Desmond nodded. So, it is a mistake. Desmond looked at him. It is not. Good Luck shook his head. No. The system makes mistakes sometimes. Desmond smiled. It did not make a mistake. You are telling me you actually carried first? Desmond nodded once. Yes. Good Luck looked back at the notice board, then back at Desmond, then at the notice board again. He still could not believe it. Without saying another word, he quietly walked away. School resumed for third term. The classroom slowly became lively again. Students were greeting one another after the holiday. Some were talking about where they traveled. Others were discussing football. Treasure entered the classroom carrying his school bag. Then he remembered something. The results. He immediately rushed out. A few minutes later, he came running back. Have you people checked the notice board? Nobody answered. Treasure looked around the classroom. Have you checked it? One student replied, No. Treasure pointed toward the door. Go and check. What happened? Just go. A few students stood up and walked outside. Less than a minute later, one of them rushed back inside. It is true. Another student followed. No way. Another. I checked it myself. The classroom slowly became quiet. Ella looked from one face to another. What happened? Nobody answered immediately. Finally, one student spoke. Desmond carried first. Ella frowned. What? Desmond carried first. She remained silent. The words refused to make sense. The new boy. Nobody answered. She stood up, walked out of the classroom, and headed straight for the notice board. There it was. One Desmond. She stared at it for several seconds, then quietly returned to class. She looked toward Desmond. He was already sitting quietly at his seat. Nothing about him had changed. Yet everything had changed. Daniela arrived a little later. She noticed something immediately. Students kept looking at her, then looking at Desmond, then back at her. Treasure walked over. Daniela! Yes! Have you checked the notice board? She shook her head. No. You should. Why? Treasure hesitated, then quietly said, Desmond carried first. Daniela looked at him. For a few seconds she said nothing. Then she smiled slightly. Stop joking. I am serious. She looked at Ella. Ella did not say anything. That was enough. Daniela slowly stood up, walked out of the classroom, and stopped before the notice board. She looked at the top. Once. Then again. Then one more time. 1 Desmond. Her own name was directly below it. 2 Daniela. She remained there, without moving, without saying a word. A few minutes later, she walked straight to the geography office. Their form teacher looked up. Daniela! Good morning, sir. Good morning. She hesitated, then quietly asked, Sir, was there a mistake with the results? The teacher looked at her. No. She lowered her eyes. So, Desmond really came first? The teacher nodded. Yes. He worked very hard. Then he smiled. That boy is very intelligent. Daniela thanked him, then quietly left the office. That evening, she handed the printed result to her parents. Her father looked at it, then looked again. Second, her mother frowned. What happened? You have always been first. Her father placed the result on the table. Daniela, you are starting to fall behind. She quickly shook her head. No, Daddy. I studied. I even studied harder than before. Her father sighed. Then study even harder. You cannot keep going backwards. Those words stayed in her heart, because she knew something they did not. She had not become lazy. She had not become distracted. She had actually worked harder than ever before. But someone else had simply worked even harder. From that day, everything changed. Daniela stopped thinking about protecting her first position because she no longer had it. Now she had only one goal. Take it back. At the same time, Desmond's life slowly began to change. Students greeted him differently. Teachers knew his name. His parents could not stop smiling whenever they looked at his result. For the first time since joining the school, he finally felt like he belonged. But there was one thing Desmond understood. Getting to the top had been difficult. Staying there would be even harder. Because somewhere in that same classroom, a girl who had never accepted second place had already begun preparing for third term. Would Daniela reclaim the first position that had been hers for years? Or would Desmond prove that his victory was not just for one term? Let me know in the comments. What do you think about the story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more narrated stories.